This amp is noisy. And that's why today I'm going to change the tubes. Okay, so as you heard, that was a very noisy amp, and it is time for me to change out these tubes. They're about 6 years old, and today is the day. If you're ever unsure of which tubes to buy, just look on the inside of the cabinet of the amp. Usually there's a diagram there that tells you exactly what you need. For this Fender Blues Deluxe Reissue, it's important to purchase a matched power tube set, and the reason why is because the bias adjustment pot adjusts both power tubes at the same time. But more about that in a moment. I also wanted to eliminate the possibility of anything else causing the noise in the amp, so I bought an outlet tester, and according to this, it does have the correct wiring, so I do think it is just the tubes that need to be replaced in the amp. Now I'm going to remove the back, and it does go a lot faster if you use like a cordless drill screwdriver, so that's what I'm using here. I also found out the hard way that you don't need to remove that little cage around those power tubes at the bottom. The back will come off if you keep it on. Oops. And to be clear, the amp is not plugged in. First, I'm going to start by removing this foam that surrounds some of the preamp tubes. Now it's time to remove the preamp tubes one by one. Here it looks like I'm wiggling harder than I actually am, and that's probably because I'm zoomed in pretty closely. I'm really trying to pull them as straight out as possible in order to avoid damaging the solder connections at the sockets. This tube was definitely the hardest one to remove, and again, it looks like I'm wiggling pretty hard, but I'm really just trying to pull down with as little force as possible. Now it's time to remove the power tubes. These have a metal clamp on the sides of them. You kind of have to push in and up while removing the tube down. When you go to install your new power tubes, they do need to be inserted properly in the correct direction. And this ridge essentially faces the speaker when you go to insert the new ones. So keeping that in mind, push up gently and firmly, and it should slide right into place. Now repeat the same thing for the other power tube. Here you'll see me check that that ridge is in alignment before I push it in. And again, just guide it gently and firmly until it's all the way in. Similarly, the preamp tubes also have a pattern, and you just have to follow it. There's a kind of an empty area on the tube, and you can see this empty area here. So just kind of align those areas when you're inserting it, and they should go in very easily. Once you've got them lined up properly, they go in very nicely. Now repeat the same thing for the other two preamp tubes. Don't forget to replace the foam that you took off in the beginning too. Before I plug the amp back into the outlet, I'm going to turn all the knobs down all the way. After this, I'm going to plug it in. We need to adjust the bias adjustment pot. We also need to have the bias test point, and the black probe from the meter goes right here. Before I make any adjustments, I'm going to turn the bias pot all the way down. Now I'm going to turn my attention to the bias test point. The bias test point is this little tiny area right here. This is where the red probe will go. Now I'm going to turn the amp on, but I'm going to leave it on standby for the moment. Now I'm going to turn on my meter. I'm going to be turning it to the lowest DC voltage scale, which is usually 200 millivolts. Now I can take the amp off standby. Make sure that the black probe from your meter is inserted here. Now carefully put the red probe on the test point. Now you can begin to slowly turn your bias pot clockwise and watch the meter while you do it. We're trying to hit 60 millivolts. The reason we're trying to hit 60 is because each power tube has a value of 30 individually. That's why we buy them in a matched pair, because this one bias pot adjusts both simultaneously. I'm starting to hover right around 60, so I'm going to stop right here. Then I'm going to turn everything off and start to close up the amp. Notice how I put that cage back on before I put the back panel on. It was a lot easier to do it this way. Then just screw in the back panel and you're all finished.